Right, hey everyone. So a few days ago, I just wrapped up playing my first over-the-board tournament. In about a year, it was, the tournament was called the Japan Open. It's one of the few kind of annual federated tournaments we have each year here. There just isn't much chess going on here, honestly. Shogi, which is like the Japanese chess, is a lot more popular. But anyways, I was kind of feeling pretty optimistic about how I would do this tournament. I'd recently hit 2600 Lichess on Blitz, sorry, 2600 Blitz on Lichess, and yeah, I was feeling pretty good about myself because I was like, yeah, I'm basically an IM level player now, but yeah, anyways, so in my first game here, I was facing a 1600 who I'd played last year. It starts off with d4, knife 6, c4, e6. And yeah, obviously here, if you know too about openings, you know that after knight c3, black has bishop b4, which is an Nimzo-Indian. And this is known to be a very solid opening. Many grandmasters at the top level will, of course, avoid this with knight f3, avoiding the pin on b4. Black can still play this anyway, and this is what we call the Bogo-Indian. And in the game, actually, I played g3 here, and my opponent played bishop b4 check. And this is also kind of still the Bogo-Indian defense, because very often in this position, say after bishop d2, black plays similarly in the game, like queen e7, we can still play g3. This is very often what white will do, and this is a transposition to this position after bishop b4 check, bishop d2, and queen e7, knight f3. And one advantage of g3, which is the move I played in the game, is that after b6, black can't really play the queen's Indian anymore because we get bishop g2, and it creates this annoying attack on this rook here, and it more or less forces black to play d5. And these moves d5 and b6, they don't really go together that well, and black would rather avoid this. So yeah, instead he played bishop b4 check. d5 is kind of the main move here though, and this kind of goes into the Catalan opening, which is an opening I had a lot in this tournament actually. But anyways, I'll look over that in some other games. And okay, so bishop b4 check, the Bogo-Indian, bishop d2, and here there's a bunch of moves black can play. They can play a5, the idea being that if white takes here, black can take on b4 and kind of open the rook up on the a file like that. They can also even play c5, and this looks a bit weird, but like this structure. This is actually pretty interesting here, and black, their plans vary. Sometimes they'll play d6 e5, other times they'll just go and strike directly in the center with d5. But my opponent plays the move I'm most familiar with, and I've actually played before with black, which is queen e7 here. The idea is, of course, well, if they take, black takes back with check, and there's a bunch of annoying threats here, so white shouldn't take. Instead I play knight f3, just developing my knight. Black plays knight c6, and I actually had this position a year earlier against my opponent, and the same guy, and he played bishop takes d2 check here, which wasn't so good, and he tried to go some very direct stuff after queen takes d2, knight e4, queen c2 check, and we got this position which really wasn't good for him. I just played bishop g2 next, castles, and the kind of problem with what he just did was, here in this position, this knight and bishop and queen are all his developed pieces, right? But then what he goes on to do is he exchanges off this developed bishop from my bishop, activates my queen, he brings his knight in, he brings in his queen check, and I develop a knight, and basically in this position I'm basically 2 moves away from being fully developed, while black has his queen out here exposed and exchanged all his developed pieces. So white is doing pretty well here, and I won pretty convincingly. But the idea behind knight c6 is rather subtle. It's that I play knight c3, which is kind of the most accurate move, but here if white goes bishop g2, all of a sudden black has this move, bishop takes d2 check. And here white should play knight b takes d2, but this isn't so optimal because usually we'd want to be able to recapture back for the queen and then put our knight on the more active square on c3 where it has a lot more control over the center. And the reason why bishop takes d2 check here is so accurate is because after queen takes d2 now knight e4, and all of a sudden after queen c2, queen b4 check, we have a similar position to the other game I just showed you, except we have bishop g2 and knight c6 inserted, and this actually makes a big difference, because now if knight b2, black takes here, and if white takes back to the knight, this pawn is hanging all of a sudden, and black can take here. And black's the supple pawn now, they're attacking our queen. This is something we should really avoid with white. And, well, if we take for the queen here, and then we're going to be like, okay, this endgame I'm okay with, and this probably is not bad. But the problem is it hangs c4 now, because this queen is defending the pawn from here. And black is just supple pawn now, and white is kind of struggling for compensation. So really white should avoid this, and that's why in the game I played knight 3 here, which is a very accurate move. And usually what black does here is they'll castle, and after bishop g2 they'll usually take on c3 and then play knight e4. We get a bunch of exchanges here, and then they try to play this position after d6, and they'll try to play something like e5, and we have this sort of very typical position. And here in the game though, what my opponent did is he didn't castle, he played this move a5, which might look a bit strange at first, but the idea is that very often black, they're going to adopt what we call a dark side strategy. They're going to put their pawns on d6, e5, and very often a bit later on they'll often put their pawn on a5. It's just that the order in which my opponent did things was mixed up a little bit. And I honestly thought this was a bit strange because it's like, say compared to earlier on in this variation when black plays a5 here, here it's serving a more concrete purpose and it's directly defending the bishop on b4. But in this position it's like, this bishop on b4, it's not really in any danger at the moment. There's no need to defend it, back it up with a5, but it's also not terrible either. Anyways, after bishop g2, d6, my opponent continues on with his plan. And after castles, I play rook c1. And this is just a very kind of natural move, further reinforcing this knight, and also just, well, the rook is quite active on the c-file potentially. If it opens up, for example, like very often I'm going to play d5 later on, and if this pawn, say, exchanges itself here, I can play c takes d5, and all of a sudden this pawn c7 could become quite a serious target there. So in the game, instead of say playing e5, which is what I was kind of expecting from my opponent, this is just kind of the very typical move that you would play in this position. Here I was considering like knight d5 even, which is a bit of an exotic move which sometimes pops up in these variations. D5 is also, of course, a very natural move, but to me in this position, I wasn't a big fan of it because after something like knight b8, a3, bishop c5 looked a little bit annoying because he's not forced to exchange his bishop since our pawn is not in d4 anymore, controlling the square. And yeah, it honestly didn't seem so easy for white to play his position. So what my opponent did though, instead of e5, which to me just seemed really natural, he played h6, and I made a video on some typical opening mistakes that people make, and this one where people play like h6 and a6, it's very common actually, and it's not like a fatal mistake, but it just is often a bit weakening, and it's also just kind of a waste of a tempo very often. So I wasn't too scared of like h6. I just played a3, forcing him to swap off his bishop, and here we get this position where again black has an option to play something like e5 or knight e4 or a4, which he did, and this is kind of makes things a bit more difficult for me to expand with my queenside play, because very often what white want to do is to play b4 eventually. But when the pawn is on a4, of course we can go en passant, and now black has traded kind of their a pawn for the more central b pawn, and they've also created this long-term weakness that they can kind of hack away against later on in the middle game. So b4 is a lot more difficult to achieve now, and what I kind of have to be careful about here with white, I have to say, is that long-term kind of statically, if I just kind of sit on the position, say I play move like queen c2 here, if black plays like e5, d5, and I just kind of go along for the flow here. I don't recommend doing this, but say I do hypothetically, something like e4, knight b7, now knight c5 is coming next, it's going to attack its pawn, black will consider moving the knight somewhere, maybe like to e8, I don't know, and then going f5, and it's not easy to really play this position because they often, I don't know, rook here, I can't even go b4 anymore because black just takes this, they win a pawn. And if I don't have my queenside pawn b4, it's really not clear what do I have here. I'm just kind of waiting my impending doom here with black playing f5 eventually, and trying to hope that that sort of break benefits me. So instead of like, yeah, I'm not signing up for that, I'm gonna do my own thing, I'm gonna play d5 immediately. And here black has to be quite careful of, like, you know, if they just take here and they try to be very active, it's going to backfire quite quickly because I take, and then I go bishop b4, I attack the queen, sorry, wrong diagonal, and I'm going to win material here because after the queen moving away like here, I just take the rook. So instead, when my opponent did, he played knight b8, just trying to carry out this maneuver, knight a6 to c5, or maybe knight d7 since pawn's hanging actually, just be a bit careful. So once again, I didn't want to play statically. I didn't want black to just go like e5 and then consolidate really easily. I didn't want none of that. So I took on e6. My opponent takes back. And here I play something very dynamic here. I once again play c5. And I'm just trying to, like, say black plays knight c6. Then I'm going to take here. And all of a sudden I'm going to like follow up with something like queen d3, rook fd1. I'm going to pile up on this d6 pawn. So instead in this position, what black should probably do is to play d5, which they did in the game. I should also note that taking on c5 is quite risky because after knight e5, I utilized the square which the pawn d6 was defending, but it got deflected away from. And I'm threatening knight g6 to win an exchange. My bishop's also quite active now, and it's not easy for black to develop any of his pieces really. This knight on c6, this bishop here, not to mention this rook on a8 if those pieces can't get out. So what my opponent did is he played d5, which makes sense because now after knight e5, which I played anyway, this bishop is kind of being blocked in by this pawn on d5. And something to note here though is black can't take on c5 very easily because I just get bishop b4, and this queen's under fire in all sorts of directions. If they just move back here, they're losing the exchange once again. So instead, after rook e8, which he played in the game, kind of avoiding these threats with knight g6 and also bishop b4 retakes on c5, now he can seriously consider taking here on c5. And what I really should have done in the game was I should have been like, okay, I should keep up the momentum, just keep throwing stuff at him, and I should have played e4. There were other moves the engine showed were strong, but to me this kind of seemed like the most logical way of doing things, just blowing up the center. And he played knight takes, I can take here, I go queen g4, and all of a sudden it's very difficult for black to defend here. This pawn's under attack, I'll just take this next if I can. Not to mention this pawn on g7 is very tender, so black has to be careful about defending it. They shouldn't just go grabbing the c5 pawn, for example, for multiple reasons. So yeah, instead, though what I did in the game, I didn't kind of consider that too seriously. I was just like, okay, I can play queen d4. I was too concerned about defending the c5 pawn, but if I played e4, that shouldn't be a big deal because this thing's just naturally going to open up. And here my opponent played, well, this move knight to 6, which I didn't really consider too strongly. It's very forcing because, well, it attacks my queen, it attacks my knight. Although the computer just tells me to play something like queen d2 here, so maybe not, I guess. But I didn't really consider this too seriously because it doesn't make that much sense to develop your queen here and then bring it all the way back, you know, but okay, it's what computers tell you to do. So to me, what the very natural move seemed to do was just take here, double his pawns, and he is threatening e5, just taking over the center, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to stop you from doing that. I like my position, I don't see the problem here. And he plays knight d7, which I anticipated. Just hitting the c5 pawn, and maybe considering e5, although that would open the position for my bishop here, so I don't think that's something to take too seriously. So I played king h1 here, and I'm saying that, you know, I'm not really gonna play a move like, say, bishop b4 defending this pawn like this. This is just way too passive. My bishop is basically what you'd call a tall pawn here. It's a bishop that's doing the role of a pawn. It's really sad. Don't treat your bishops like this. So instead I played king h1. And the idea is that, well, say if I just played some move like h3 here. They'd play queen takes c5, and I like to play queen takes g7, but if you notice here, Lichess doesn't let me play that. That's because it's illegal, because my queen is pinned to the king. So instead what I did here was I played king h1. So now that if queen takes c5 is played, that'd be a blunder, and I'd have made 1. Unfortunately, this didn't happen in the game, and he prolonged the game for a couple more hours. So, yeah, he played knight takes... No, he didn't play knight takes c5. That's what I wanted to say, actually. So I was walking around at this point in the game. He was taking a bit of time, and here, when I came back to the board after walking around for a bit, like 5 minutes maybe, I was just like settling back in, and I'm like, you know what if he actually plays knight takes c5? And as some of you may have noticed, I have this move bishop b4, and I'm winning. Well, actually no, I'm not, because he has knight b3, which I noticed when I came back to the board, and all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit, I might be in trouble, because after bishop takes e7, he has knight takes d4, my bishop's under attack, knight takes e2 could be coming next, bishop a6, really not that clear at all. And if, say, queen c3, just avoiding the attack on the queen while also keeping the attack on this queen. Can't draw arrows to my life. Anyways, he could go something like c5, and if we exchange queens like this, maybe black could go at rook a b8. Didn't even need to say rook a b8, only one rook can go to b8. b2 is kind of being hammered on, and I don't know, I'm not terribly convinced that white's a whole lot better here, if better at all, honestly. So, in the game, though, what my opponent did is he didn't notice knight takes c5 was possible, so he instead played queen f6, and here, this surprised me a lot though, I have to say. I was like, really, bro? Like, I can at the very least move my queen somewhere, like here, make a discovered attack on your queen, get an e4 next, but then after something like queen g6, it all of a sudden wasn't very clear. Like, I was like, okay, maybe I play rook c1 to try and get an e4 next, but then after knight f6, I was like, I don't really see how I'm banging in the e4 here. The engine's just like, just play queen d4, bro, it's all good. Because now my queen, it's, well, not under attack by the queen from here, so it can be, it can stand more freely on the d4 square, but I don't know, for some reason it didn't occur to me during the game. But anyways, what I did instead of that in the game was I played e4. And I was like, okay, even though he's 600 rating points lower, and generally it's like a lot of people associate trading queens with drawish tendencies, I'm like, you know what, whatever, I'll grind him out in this endgame, whatever, I'll win without too much troubles. And he took, of course, and then played bishop a6, and I played rook fe1, okay, we got to this position, and I was like, I have everything I could ever want, this bishop's amazing here, I have 2 bishops, he has doubled pawns, this pawn's weak, this pawn's kind of weak, like, I should be winning this pretty easily, right? And then he plays bishop c4, and I all of a sudden, like, tank, and I go on, like, 20 minutes here, and I have some serious kind of things to sort out, because things weren't as easy as I thought they were. Here, I really took a think in this position, because it's not clear what white really does here. Like, and I think I should really kind of underline what black's last move really does. For one, it cuts my rook off in the c-file. Another thing is it protects this pawn, which makes exchanging on d5 a lot less attractive in some sense. Because whenever you have the bishop pair, particularly in endings, you don't really want to trade one bishop off. You want to be able to keep both of them on, so that way you can apply pressure on both of the color complexes. But yeah, it's just not that easy to really come up with a plan here. And one thing that really I wanted to play with was kind of rook c3. And I was thinking like double rooks here and put pressure on this way, but yeah, I wasn't terribly convinced, because something after like rook a b8, this, knight f6, all of a sudden didn't seem that clear to me. Like, say I go bishop e5, maybe, like, attacking this, it's like, well, you can actually just take here, and after takes, I can't really take here, because he just wins an exchange. And even if I don't take say I go king g1, he still goes bishop d5. And it's like, how do I break through from this? He's up a pawn as well, so it's, what do I do? So another move I was considering was e takes d5. Just try and open things up immediately. And one reason I was seriously considering this was because I felt like he'd play c takes d5. And if you want to pause the video right here and find tactic for white, I recommend you do so, but it's rook takes c4. And the idea is after this, we made an even exchange in material so far, but now after rook takes e6, I win a pawn. Rook e7 is coming next, and I'm just ready to fork a bunch of stuff. But instead of c takes d5 here, what my opponent had was at least bishop takes d5 or e takes d5, which is kind of what I was seriously considering the most. And according to the engine, I'm just doing good after like bishop f3 and then king g2 and g4. And I think I looked at something similar to this, but yeah, this didn't, for some reason, wasn't on my radar too much. And I went for something similar in the game though with g4, using a similar plan. But the problem was after rook a5, all of a sudden, things aren't so easy. It's using the fact once again that this bishop cut my rook off from the c file, and knight takes c5 is a serious threat now. And I played c takes d5, I was like kind of panicking here. I'm like, I'm panicking, I'm not sure really. But I was kind of thinking like, am I actually gonna win this game? It's not that simple anymore. And here I should also note that one thing that made me a little bit suspicious of rook a5 when I first saw it was that it leaves this rook quite loose. Now you can't play e takes d5 because I just win the rook. And but instead he has c takes d5. And before it didn't really work, right? Because I had rook takes c4, d takes c4, and bishop takes a8. But now you'd notice that bishop takes a8 isn't a thing anymore. So I can't really go into that. So in the game I just played c6. And here the problem was I felt like, what do I do after knight c5? The knight's coming into b3, to d3, I don't know, one of those two squares. And it's gonna fork a bunch of stuff, and I don't like that. And I just didn't see what to do here. Like, I was like, black just seems fine. But my opponent spent like 10 minutes here or something, and I'm like, wait, bro, what are you thinking about? Let's go knight c5. And then he played it, and I'm like, it got to a point where I'm like, is he even gonna play knight c5? Like, what else do you do? And he plays knight f8, and I'm like, out of all the knight squares, you literally picked the stupidest looking one. What? Okay, you know what? And I don't know. So here I felt somewhat relieved. I'm like, okay, I have some chances now. But the engine kind of shows that the only way to really keep an advantage here is by playing some weird shit, man. Like with f5. Sorry, that's why I played in the game. Rook a6. And I was saying like you take on c4, which isn't a completely bonkers idea, but after like d takes c4 was saying bishop c3 is the most accurate move, which I just don't understand honestly. But you know, this is engines for you. But yeah, no. Instead in the game I played rook c3, and my idea was quite simple. It was just to go g5, bang this through, and bring my rook here, not to f3, and go rook g3 and just do something. But it didn't work so well because after rook a6, just attacking the c6 pawn, there's no real way I can save that anymore. I could try and sack an exchange and go bishop d5. And he can't really take because I win this, of course. And then I can consider taking on c4 or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, it's something to keep in mind. But yeah, I'm not terribly convinced by this. So instead in the game, what I do is I was like, okay, I'm gonna go g5, and if he takes, I'm gonna go rook g3. And the idea is if he takes here, I take like this, and here I have like a million possible discovered checks, and pretty much all of them should be winning. Rook e7 check probably is the simplest, and now I just win the rook. Yeah, and say you play g6, and here when I first saw this, I'm like, really? That's kind of bad. It looks like he's weakening this whole diagonal even more. Once again, I can't draw arrows. But I'm like, I'm pretty happy with this. But then I started to think a bit, and I'm like, okay, if I play f takes g5, which is what I kind of wanted to play at first, if he just takes here, my control over the e5 score is not that strong, and he could consider playing e5 at any moment, just kind of liberate himself and whatnot. And I wasn't convinced, and I could be coming to d7 next as well to support this. Yeah, I was kind of a little bit shaken there. So I instead played rook takes g5, but the problem here is that it's very difficult to utilize my rook here. Say compared to f takes g5, the advantage of this is that it's a lot easier to transfer my rook to a split like h3 and then to h8 or something, or f3 and this way or something. But when the rook's on g5, I can't do any of that because it's controlled by this pawn on g6 actually. So after, well, I played rook takes g5 in the game, I should also add that. And after king f7, I'm like, let's just try and, I don't know, be active. But the problem was I still hadn't transitioned. I was still like kind of trying to play ambitiously. My position didn't really match up with that reality. Like he just played rook takes c6, and I was like thinking of playing like h4, and then I settled on rook eg1. But already I should have been thinking, how can I restrict black from kind of just going out of control? And here I should have played rook c1, pinning this bishop to the rook here. Instead, I was really way too ambitious in the way I was playing. And after bishop d3 here, rook c4 is coming. It's going to put pressure on here. Bishop e4 might also come after that. And I don't really have a clear plan. Also, not to mention that this bishop protects this pawn on g6, and something like knight h7 could be coming at any moment. So I played at h4 here. I'm trying to still break through, but after rook c4, I'm like, looking at my position, and I'm like, is this really happening to me? I'm down a pawn. He's probably going to be able to trade off one of my bishops, which is one of my only advantages in the position. And I was like, what the hell, man? What's going on? And at first I wanted to play bishop e5, but then I looked at this closely and I'm like, yeah, knight d7, he's going to trade his bishop. But if I go to bishop c3, by the way, I should add that, I think. Wait, d4 or... No, it's not even d4, it just takes an f4. And he forks this stuff, and I'm just losing. So instead what I was thinking of was like h5. So after knight takes e5, takes here, rook h4 check. And I'm like, yeah, surely this is not good. So instead what I was like thinking was that, okay, if I want to have any chances of not even just winning, but drawing this game, I should probably keep my bishop on somehow. So like, okay, I'm gonna go bishop e3 because I felt like my dark sword bishop was kind of like my one hope in the position that I could really kind of bank my money on. And he goes bishop e4, which I was kind of expecting, trading off one bishop, that's sensible. I go bishop d2, and yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure what he was going to do here. I think he had a bit of a time advantage as well, which is really just devastating. But I actually thought here in this position I have not terrible chances because h5 is coming in next. This knight can't really move easily because I don't know, so it goes knight h7. Well, now this pawn is undefended, so I take here. That was one sort of benefit of him trading off the bishops on e4, was that he no longer had this bishop on d3 kind of defending this pawn really annoyingly. So, yeah, it makes it a little bit more difficult for him to bring his pieces and be played rook b8, which is fairly sensible, just attacking this. And again, I can't really play a move that I want to play, like, say, bishop c3. Although I was about to say it's because of d4, but actually no, it's just because of rook takes f4 actually. So instead what I played here was I played h5. I'm like, you know what? At this point I'm just going all in. I'm just gonna do stuff. I'm just gonna throw all my pieces at him, and it honestly kind of worked. Like he took here first, and I was expecting that, of course. Like you can't really just let my h pawn run loose or take here. So he took, and I didn't with the check. I'm like, I don't see what else to do. And he played king f6. And yeah, he has to be a little bit careful that his his king doesn't get like mated somehow, which I'll see in some possible scenarios of. But first of all, I should say that in this position I took here. And here I was feeling pretty optimistic because I'm like, if he's not careful, I can just go rook here and rook f7, and that's mate. I'm feeling good. And if he takes on b2, it's very convenient the king is placed on f6 because I get bishop c3 with check, and after king f5, I not only can win the rook actually, but I can just deal with a mate. So instead, back in this position, my opponent played a move which for some reason I'd completely overlooked, and it was knight g6. And then I was like, oh, crap, I don't see what I can do. And all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, this is really devastating. This rook's coming in, encroaching on b2, this pawn's being attacked, his king is safe, I just don't really have anything. Then I just found this idea, f5, and I'm like, whoa, this might be really strong actually. The idea is that both ways in which black takes, he's going to lose this knight in g6. If he takes the king, I get rook f7 check. Not that bonds. Rook f7 check. The king's forced to go here, and then I take here. Whether this is winning or not, I don't know, because he still has like a shit ton of pawns, and rooks are kind of active. So, you know, take for that what you will. But the other recapture, e takes f5 runs into rook c6 check, and here after rook e6, at the very least I can take here and take here, which is what I saw in my initial calculations. But then after like a bit of thinking, I was like, oh crap, oh no, he has rook h4 check first, king h2, and then no matter which way he takes on f5, I think he like takes on f5, whichever way. I don't really have anything. I also noticed he could probably take on b2 as well, and this looks quite devastating as well. But say after like king f5 here, the whole idea behind this check on h4 is that this rook is cut off from the g-file, which means that it's not applying pressure on that knight anymore, so it's all the stuff like rook f7 check, now he just goes king e5, and there's no threats, I'm just losing. So it's really like, oh, what am I... Because like after rook h4 check, king g2, I am not seeing any ways of possibly bringing this game back. And then I see him hovering his hand over the e pawn, and I'm like, wait, no, he's not actually going to play that, is he? And then he plays it. And I'm like, oh my god, thank you god. I'm not a Christian, but anyways. So rook c6 check. And then not only does he fall into this, but he plays rook e6. Which is kind of what I was expecting at first, but actually it was better to play king f7. And then I have to take on g6, and he takes on b2, and this is quite good for him. Well, not quite good for him, but relatively compared to the game, this would be good for him. But after rook e6, I noticed that I actually have a lot more accurate move than simply taking on e6 here. It's I can play a check on z3 first, because the kind of problem here is if I take like this, and then take here, no matter where I move my rook, he's going to take on b2 next. And it's going to be really difficult to win that position. So what I decided was that I can deliver a check first, and then after king f7, now I can take, and say he goes here, I can just give a check here, and now I don't have to deal with any pawn being captured on b2, and this position is just undoubtedly winning for white. So instead of king f7, what my opponent did was he played knight e5, which at first might look like the drawback of bishop c3 check. It's like, doesn't he just have this? But actually, this doesn't work with after bishop takes e5 check. I think he missed this, which is it. Now, king takes e5, and I have rook e1 check, and this check is coming from this side, and this rook is being attacked from this side. So after this, he's just losing the rook, and yeah, just all of a sudden the game completely turned around, and I'm up a rook. He has the 3 pawns on the king side, well, center as well technically, but yeah, I managed to bring the win home without too many troubles. So Yeah, really strange stuff, honestly. It's like he played the worst possible moves. And like from f5, like not only did he screw up, e takes f5, and rook e6. He also played knight e5. It's like, man, I'm so lucky. I don't know. It's kind of somehow in the back of my mind, I never thought I was gonna lose the game, even though my position was like really bad in knight g6. I never quite registered in my brain actually like how bad my position was for some reason. Call it arrogance, I don't know, but I guess that sort of helped in some sense. But yeah, the rest of the game was not too much. Really, it was just more or less kind of being careful not to blunder and just picking up his pawns. And then I played my opponent, this guy, last year as well, as I was saying earlier, and in very similar fashion, he played until the very end where I was like promoted my pawn, gain a queen, and then checkmate him. And I'm like, why isn't this guy resigning? And the same thing happened in this game. He like kept playing until the very end. I'm like, dude, you could have stayed like 15-20 minutes if you just resigned earlier when like you were clearly losing. I'm not saying when he had those like 3 pawns or whatever, like, okay, that I can understand. But once I already took all of them, I'm like, why are you playing on? But anyways, I'm not gonna judge too much. I brought the win home, and yeah. So anyways, hope you guys found this analysis useful. I'm going to be bringing out another video soon with my round 2 game, so I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you until next time. See you.